Hello, my name is Katie Hart, and I would like to welcome you today to our seminar about the commercial sexual exploitation of children and youth, which we call CSEC for short. CSEC is a form of human trafficking that's happening here in the United States, and today we're going to be focusing on domestic-born victims who were then exploited into the commercial sex industry. So I'm going to start by telling you a little bit about myself and how I ended up here today. I am 36 years old, and I was myself a victim of human trafficking from age 19 to 26. In 2006, when I escaped from my exploiter, I was lucky enough to have a woman who took me in and helped me to rest and get support for the healing that I needed. For the last few units of my degree, I took an internship with the Special Victims Unit at the San Francisco Police Department, and I did all kinds of things for them there, helping with their anti-human trafficking efforts. So I listened to jailhouse phone calls when an alleged exploiter had been arrested. I prepared case files for the district attorney's office, and I helped the investigators to look at these cases and try to figure out ways that we could really help to hold the exploiters accountable for their crimes. For the past year, I've been working with the University of California at Davis, training social workers and community partners throughout the northern part of California. And I'm really happy to be here today to talk about some of the issues related to the commercial sexual exploitation of children. One of which being that we know that the anti-trafficking movement really needs to start including more survivors' voices into the conversation. There's a lot about human trafficking that unfortunately is somewhat counterintuitive. We're talking about trauma bonding to an exploiter and those sorts of things. And so we really are honored today to give myself and two other survivors voices to tell their stories. The three of us have different and unique stories, and for those of you who are going to be working with this population, you'll see that each story really is different and unique, and that it is important to listen to the survivor, listen to their stories, and hear what it is that they need from us as adults who are trying to offer services or keep them safe. Hi, Jessica. Thank you so much for being here with me today.
Thank you for having me, Katie.
You're welcome. So I invited you here today to talk a little bit about your past and your experience being a victim of the commercial sexual exploitation of children. So I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about your story, if that's okay.
Yes.
Okay, great. So I want to kind of talk about the beginning and the middle and the end. So first tell me about what was happening in your life at that point that you think made you vulnerable?
At that point in my life, I was vulnerable due to the fact that I had a lot of family problems going on. I wasn't doing very well in school. I wasn't getting along with my peers, and I was just looking for an option to run away from it all, really.
Okay.
And yeah, a lot of it was family addiction and just trying to run from the problems.
Yeah, definitely. Home life struggling. And how old were you when you first met your exploiter?
At the time that I met my exploiter, I was 16 years old.
Okay. So tell me a little bit about when you first met your exploiter. What was your exploiter doing?
When I first met my exploiter, he was sitting outside after a concert, just preying on girls my age, just looking for a pretty little young thing to make his mark on, and I was that one.
Okay, so and when your first encounter with him, what kind of things did he say, or what did he say to you?
The first encounter that I had with him, he basically told me that I had so much potential, that I could be doing big things in life, I could be going places, and it was
kind of what you were looking for.
Yeah, it was what I was looking for. It was the escape that I needed, and it was a way that I thought that I could be independent, and it wasn't.
So did he pretend to be a romantic interest? Was he pretending that he was...
wanted to act like he was my boyfriend, basically. He made me think that I was his only girl at the time, that I was this special little diamond in the ruts, and yeah.
Okay, so after you met your exploiter, how long was it before he started exploiting you?
It was a week before about a week after I met him.
What did your exploiter do to isolate you? I mean, I guess you were already kind of isolated from your peers and your family, so that was kind of built in, but did your exploiter do anything to isolate you further?
Yeah, he took me away from the town that I was born and raised in and took me to an area where I didn't know anybody. So, yeah, that was a good form of isolation right there, taking me to an area where
Absolutely.
I didn't have anybody to run to. I didn't have nobody to turn to if things
Absolutely.
went wrong. So.
And how long, I know that you said that you have had 2 exploiters. How long did the first exploiter?
The first exploiter lasted about 3 months.
And what happened?
I was set up in a sting operation. My sister had connections with law enforcement and the FBI down in Anaheim in Orange County, and they set up a sting operation and brought me back home.
Okay, so at that time, how old were you?
At that time, I was 16.
What services were provided to you as a 16-year-old victim of CSEC?
They put me in juvenile hall because they thought I was a flight risk, and they set me up with a counselor that they wanted me to see weekly, and they had also tried to put me on Seroquel as well.
Okay.
And that was about the only services that I was getting. And I'm sure there were more services out there, but I wasn't really trying to deal with it at that point in my life. I was just trying to cover it up. I wasn't ready. I was still wanting to run.
So now I just want to talk a little bit about your second exploiter. So you were back home at this point and you're 17. So what happened next?
I was back home and I was still having problems with family issues. I was addicted to drugs, and I just needed to run. I was not trying to stay in the area, and at that time I'd already been exploited, and people in my town were finding out that I had been exploited, so I had no friends really to turn to, which that isolated me a lot.
Absolutely.
Too, because people are cruel. And especially teenagers can be really cruel.
So your peers were shaming you?
Yeah, my peers were definitely shaming me, and so I ran from it. I wasn't trying to face anybody else. And
so what happened when you met your second exploiter? Where were you? What was happening that day?
I was actually doing a weed deal. I was selling weed to this guy out of town, and he told the guy that I was with that he would pay good money to have a girl like me working for him. And what had happened was he ended up buying me, I guess, from that guy. Technically, is what you would call it. And
so he paid your boyfriend?
Yeah, he paid my boyfriend at the time, and I got in the car with him, and off to Arizona I went.
Okay, so he paid your boyfriend for you and took you in the car to Arizona.
Yeah, and I had no knowledge of the whole transaction that had taken place until after the fact, so.
Yeah, a lot of manipulation.
Yeah, a lot of manipulation. I was 17 years old, on drugs, so I was an easy target.
Absolutely. And then you went to Arizona, and that's where you were exploited by your second exploiter.
Yeah, I was exploited for about 4 to 5 months by my second exploiter. In Phoenix, Arizona, and it was very, very terrifying. It was a totally different experience than what I had in Anaheim.
Can you talk a little bit about it?
Yeah, he was very violent. He was very violent and just demanding, really, and controlling, and everything that I did was under like a little magnifying glass. He told me when to wake up, he told me when to eat, he told me when to work out, he told me who to see. Had I had brought back like $20 less than what I was supposed to make, I would be beat, or yeah, it was just. And then at nighttime, he would he would smoke Oxycontin with me to have me calm down and to like alleviate the stress from the day, is what he would call it.
What happened towards the end that started to shift that made you start to think about running away from your second exploiter?
He threatened me with a gun one day and told me that if I were to call my family or try to get out, that he would kill me. And I was in Arizona. I had never been out of the state before, and I was terrified. I was absolutely terrified. And at that point in time, I started coming to the realization that this is not how I wanted my life to end. I did not want to die in Arizona on the side of the road and somebody find me and I'd be one of those statistics that, you know, one of the, sorry, it's all hectic.
It's okay. So you started thinking about escaping from him, and tell me what happened when you did.
He had left to California to go visit his family that he had back here and take care of some business, I'm sure. And there was a girl that he had watching me that would take me to like my dates or whatever. And she was asleep one day, and I just seen the opportunity to run. Just run and don't look back, just go. And I had taken a cell phone and like a little bit of money that she had left, and I went to the bus station actually, and I sat there and he was calling me, telling me that he was gonna find me and he was gonna kill me, and I ended up getting busted at the bus station for smoking weed, which was a blessing in disguise, because had I not got busted, he might have found me, you know, and I might have not made it back to California to be with my family. And so yeah, it was very, very scary and very
traumatic.
Very traumatic.
So when law enforcement busted you for smoking pot, they brought you back to California?
No, they put me in a group home temporarily
Okay.
until my parents could come get me. My dad drove all the way from California that day.
Did they know that you had been exploited, law enforcement, at that time?
No, they didn't know that
Okay.
I had been exploited. I didn't divulge that information with them because I had dealt with it, you know, in Anaheim, and I didn't want to. I was like, oh no, they're gonna send me to juvenile hall. I don't want to go back to juvenile hall. So
Yeah, absolutely.
I didn't even divulge that information to him. I didn't tell him who he was, so he's still out there roaming around.
And so your second exploiter is still probably out exploiting young people somewhere. And your first exploiter, do you know whatever happened to him?
He is in prison right now. I watched him go to prison in January. So.
And did you play a part in him going to prison?
Yeah, they gave me the opportunity to do a victim statement in court at his trial, and so I did that statement and watched him go to prison for the rest, well, for 4 years is what they gave him.
Do you want to talk just a little bit about what that felt like, giving the statement?
Giving that statement felt amazing. It felt, I felt like I had power for the first time in I don't know how long, to be able to sit there and tell him that you didn't break me. You see me now, and I'm not broken. I'm living life, and you're not gonna define who I am as a person. So it felt really, really good. The empowerment that I felt was amazing.
And so I just want to talk just a little briefly about anything. You seem to be doing really well now. So I just want to ask if there are any like services or things along the way in your journey that have really helped you get to this place.
Victim Witness set me up with a counselor, and I see her on a weekly basis, and she helps tremendously. Just being able to talk to somebody about it, and somebody that's not going to judge me, is an amazing feeling. And other than that, there's not.
That's the number one.
Yeah, that's
thing.
the number one thing that has really helped.
Good.
So,
Well, I really appreciate you being here today. I'm so proud of you, and I'm so excited to see where your life's journey is going to take you in the future. And you're so brave, and thank you so much for being here.
thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Hello, Elle. Thank you so much for joining me today. How are you?
Good. Thanks for having me.
Sure. So you're here today to talk about your experience as the victim of commercial sexual exploitation or human trafficking. And I just want to first say I really appreciate you being willing to sit down with me today. Thank you. So I want to hear about your story kind of in terms of the beginning, the middle, and the end. So if we could start by just kind of hearing what was happening for you in your life at the time you met your exploiter that may have made you more vulnerable.
I had quite a few vulnerabilities unbeknownst to me, but for one, I was very headstrong. I thought I knew everything. I wasn't aware that there were people that eat, sleep, and breathe how to be a master manipulator. I was predisposed from childhood. I was molested by my uncle for we're not quite sure how long, but from very early childhood. So I had the usual unfortunate tendency of seeking attention from men. And at some point, I met my trafficker, and he ended up.
So you were vulnerable because you had already been trauma exposed as a child, and were you ever offered any therapy to try to resolve that trauma from your early childhood?
Yes, I was. It wasn't effective. Unfortunately, we were in poverty, so I received therapy from a state-appointed therapy that was not effective.
Okay. So, so you were already trauma exposed, and then in terms of your life, like when you first met him, what was going on with your family? I think you mentioned that you were kind of like the parent in the household.
Well, I had been helping my mother since I was around 15. I started working. She was raising 5 children on her own, and I was the second oldest. So yeah, I was working a lot and helping out financially.
Yeah, that's a lot of responsibility at 15, and it looks like you're a really strong person. How old were you when you met your exploiter?
I was 19.
You were 19. Okay. So tell me a little bit about the time that you met him. You mentioned that he had been watching you for quite some time before he actually introduced himself.
Yes, again, another instance where I learned about this was pretty recently. So things keep popping up of people saying, oh yeah, he was aware of you ahead of time, which of course I didn't know then.
So he was asking people around town kind of who you were and what your situation was?
As far as I know, he hadn't necessarily asked, but I was hanging out with a man that he had told my mom at some point after I left with my exploiter that he had witnessed him looking at me while we were out one night, things like that.
Okay. And then tell me about the day that you first met your exploiter.
I was working at a pizza place in the local mall. I was managing, and he walked in from across the mall. He saw me right away, and he made a straight line for me. We chatted for a few minutes. He was very charismatic and kind, and he handed me a business card. And it said, professional gentleman, something along the lines of that, always hiring. And
so he had a business card which made him look like a legitimate businessman, even if it was kind of a silly card. And when you first met him, what kind of questions was he asking you? Was he trying to figure out your history and kind of what was going on with you in your life?
The very first meeting, no. The next time we met, the night we spent together, yes.
Tell me about that.
He was just asking things about if I've ever been hurt, who hurt me, those sorts of questions.
So very early on, he wanted to know about any kind of trauma that you had been exposed to.
Yes.
In your history.
Yes.
Did he pretend to be your boyfriend, or did he pretend to be a businessman who was offering you a business opportunity, or both? Like, what kind of role was he playing when he was getting to know you?
We spent a night together. He went back to Sacramento, where he was from, which was 5 hours from where I met him, my hometown. And he's called me every day for about a month, sometimes twice a day, not in like a creepy sort of way, but in a generally interested sort of way, which I was surprised by. And yes, he wanted to know everything about my previous abuse, about any sort of problems that I've had, especially around the subject of men throughout my life. And I took this as an intellectual conversation, the things no one wanted to talk about, unbeknownst to me. Yeah, he had a reasoning for all this. He wanted to even know what my uncle looked like. He wanted to know what kind of clothes he wore. And he said that the reason he was wondering because he thinks it's a form of therapy to go through those sorts of memories.
Okay, so he was playing a role that he was going to help you process this stuff and move on from it.
Yeah.
How long after you first met your exploiter did the exploitation begin?
After the night that we spent together, which is when I kind of consider
Okay.
the actual meeting, it was about a month in between when he was calling me on the phone until he asked me if I wanted to go take a trip to Sacramento for 3 days.
Okay, and during that month, was there anything that you can think of looking back where he was working to isolate you from any friends and family that you had, or do you think that the isolation piece really happened when he took you from your hometown?
Yeah, I think that I already pretty much am a pretty isolated person, just naturally, not even in an unhealthy way, just in the way since I was a child. So he knew he had to physically remove me out of the situation.
Okay. So he called you and asked if you wanted to go on a romantic getaway to Sacramento for 3 days?
I was having some drama back home with my ex-boyfriend, so it was pretty extensive. So he said, well, just take a few days off. You work real hard. You just got promoted. Come and spend 3 days with me.
Okay. So he drove you to Sacramento?
Yeah, he came, he picked me up, and then he drove me back to Sacramento.
And then what happened next?
We had a good night. His cousin showed up at some point throughout the night, and we had fun. We drank, we talked, and then the next morning I woke up, and he was a different person, seemingly, and he told me he was not who he said he was, and that he was a pimp, and that I was going to be his prostitute, or, well, for better terms, prostitute.
And were you scared? How were you feeling?
At first, I didn't understand what was going on. I wasn't processing it. Being a girl from a small town, I didn't understand. And then, as time went on, I realized he's not joking, and he was getting very angry that I wasn't processing. And then I just thought that, I went into shock. I went into total shock.
And then what happened next?
I don't know how long I was on the floor. I just fell to the ground after a while. He kept coming in and out. He'd come in and he'd be really nice all of a sudden. Hey, I just really need you to do this for me. You owe me money. I came in, I picked you up. I had to rent a car. It's a lot of money you owe me, so you're just going to have to make this back. And then he'd leave and he'd come back, and he would be very physically aggressive, getting in my face. At one point he said, you can get up and go. I'll take you. I have everything that you bought. I'll take everything. It's all going to stay here, so you have to go naked and barefoot, and there's a lot worse people out there than me. I still got up to go and walk towards the door, and he stepped in front of me and said some choice words. And I got back on the ground, and I stayed there for a while until he came. I don't know if it was a day or two. I remember it was morning when this happened. It was dark at some point. And he said that he had a pimp friend that owned a brothel, that I looked good enough to not have to be on the streets. And he's going to call him and get me in there.
So during this time when he was coming in and out, you were being held in a hotel room? Where were you physically?
I was in his apartment.
Okay.
In a room that you can't get out of the window. And then there's a bathroom. And to get out, I would have had to have run through him and his cousin. I knew there was a gun out there, too. He showed me his gun.
Okay.
So
then he started exploiting you, and how long were you exploited there?
I was exploited, I believe, I'm not sure, but around 7 months is when we think at this point.
Okay. And so I'm sure during that 7 months, just the trauma bonding and manipulation, can you talk at all about kind of what happened to you mentally during that 7-month period? Kind of what state you were in by the time 6 or 7 months came along?
Yeah, the very first day at the brothel, the first purchaser was identical to my uncle, to the clothes, to the half-bald head, to everything, and that was no coincidence. After that, I checked out, as I did when I was a child, and I went through shock. I was in shock for a long time, and then eventually, I don't know, maybe he broke me. I'm not sure what it was, but I was just totally checked out, and I call it zombie mode, is what I went into, zombie mode.
And you mentioned a story about one time that you kind of had a rough day and you weren't feeling well, and your exploiter, at that point, you weren't using substances and you never had before. So talk to me, just tell me that story again.
Yeah, he didn't allow me to use substances, which honestly I didn't want to, because I knew that if I did, I knew where I would end up. But yes, I had been telling him that I'm going to go. You know, I can't do this anymore. Either I'm going to kill myself or you, but I'm going to go. And I told him he needs to get other girls, you know, so that I could leave. I gave him a month, and that month was coming, and it was my birthday. And he told me when I got home from work that I could take some ecstasy and drink some Hennessy. So I took a couple of shots. And I was hesitant because I didn't want to get into that head space. But I took a couple of shots and I took some ecstasy. And he started talking about, after 10 minutes after I took it, he started talking about, you know, you can't leave. You're not going to go anywhere. You're never going to leave me. You belong to me. I own you. Very trying to, you know, stroke me and be very kind while I'm on ecstasy, of course. I told him I can't talk about this right now, and I went to stand up to go. He grabbed my hand, and I thought he was going to hurt me. And so I punched him in the face and knocked his tooth loose. And I saw the look in his eyes. He checked out. And so I ran into the bathroom, and he busted the door down. He nearly killed me. He strangled me, lifted my 6-foot body up off the floor 3 feet. And I passed out. He was dragging me to the car when I woke up. Then he put me in the bathroom, and he came in and he said, if you are going to leave, I'm going to take your hair, because you didn't have that when I met you. I had dyed it a little darker shade of red. So he went in the other bathroom and grabbed the buzzers and came in and started trying to shave my head. And for some reason, that's when I started fighting. And he got scared, and he stopped. And then he gave me some more drugs while I was crying. And then he took me to a sex store. And then he took all my phones and everything, and he drew me to Reno, into a hotel where he was gambling for 3 days, and he was dosing me during those 3 days, it turns out.
Okay, so that was a story that paints a really good example of how exploiters use trauma bonding and substances and further isolation by moving you to an entire new state when he sensed that something was shifting for you. So thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it. And then what happened around that 7-month period? What happened for you in the days or moments leading up to the time when you escaped?
The first time I escaped, he had come home, and I had just happened to be there, which was rare. And he gave me some pictures of a very young girl, and he said, post this.
What does he mean by post it?
Post this on the internet, post her advertisement on the internet. And I had never done that before, and I asked him how old she was, and he said that she was 17. And I swear my brain shook out of my head at that point, because something happened and snapped me back in, is that he told me he would never touch a minor. So, right, and I had a young sister that he was always threatening to traffic her. So something happened, and my brain just, I don't know, it just woke up, and he said, just post this, I gotta go take care of her. She's a runaway. If I wouldn't have done it, someone else would have, he said. So he left, and all of a sudden, I was back, and I got on the phone, and I called my mom, and I told her what had happened. In a matter of about 10 minutes, she didn't know. And I called a cab. I had been hiding around $400, which is very risky, as you well know. But I knew something was going to happen. So I called a cab, and then I had them drive me somewhere else. And this last time I escaped, I had finally found someone that was going to help me. I found a friend that had enough money to help me, that had a car to come pick me up, that had a house to house me in an area where I knew he wouldn't be because he didn't work in Southern California. And she was going to take care of me until I got a job and got back on my feet. So he busted my eye open after I had influenced him to travel down south. On the way there, he busted it open, and then he put me on the streets for the first time because I couldn't work on the internet with a busted eye. So I had an out for her to pick me up.
Wow, well, God bless her.
Yeah.
So she came and picked you up one night while you were working the streets, and you were able to escape from him?
Yes.
And what happened to your exploiter? Do you know?
What happened? Yes, I know what happened to my exploiter. After I escaped, the last time, he had found me at a hotel. I had been trying to work for a week or two to get some money, to get some rent money or something. And he found me. I called the cops before he physically got to me, thankfully. And they ended up they didn't arrest me, which was amazing. If they would have arrested me, I've never had prostitution or solicitation on my record. If they would have arrested me, I don't know if I ever would have gotten out, in all honesty. But they didn't. They just asked, would you testify against him? And I said, yes. And a couple years later, I got a phone call from the Orange County District Attorney's Office asking if I would. I traveled down there for 2 weeks. He took a plea deal for human trafficking, it was pimping and pandering, got less than 2, and rape of a minor, false imprisonment. And then again, in 2014, I got a call from a Humboldt County District Attorney's Office asking me if I would testify against him. I said yes. And over 8-month period of trial, a couple of mistrials, 6 days of testifying, we ended up getting him on rape of a minor, false imprisonment, and the first human trafficking charge in Humboldt County. So he's in jail right now.
How does that feel?
I got a letter the other day saying he'll be out in 3 years. So I know where he's going when he does. It feels good that I have that many years to get the community mobilized and get education out there so that when he does get out, hopefully there'll be less people that he can target.
Yes, absolutely. I just want to ask one more question. Were you offered any services? Were you ever told that you were the victim of a crime and offered services when you made contact with law enforcement?
I was not told that when I spoke to the police officers at the hotel. I was not told that when I went down to testify in Orange County.
You were not told that you were a victim?
I was not told that I was a sex trafficking victim. So there was no name to what had happened to me.
Right.
And until I went to testify against him in the Humboldt County trial did I learn that I was a victim of human trafficking.
So you obviously were never offered any services as a victim then?
I was not in the Orange County trial, other than they were saying through victim witness I might be able to get therapy, but there was no one that understood this back at my home. So I was offered through victim witness in the second trial a court-appointed therapist, and I saw her for a year, and she was phenomenal. I actually work with her now. There was rape crisis was a very big help. No one really understood what was going on, but they all listened, and they were as accommodating as they could be.
Is there anything that you wish could be different? If you had a magic wand and you could go back to that time when you first left him and could offer yourself any one service, what would it be?
I would say it would be a survivor advocate, I think, would have really hit me.
So someone who had been through something similar that could mentor you and advocate for you and help you understand.
Yeah, I believe so.
Okay. Well, I just really want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for being here. I think that it's very, very brave, and I think that people are going to learn a lot from you telling your story. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
As I mentioned earlier, I was exploited starting at the age of 19. And we know that exploiters are very good at seeking out potential victims who are experiencing some level of vulnerability for any reason. So we know that there's a correlation between previous sexual abuse and becoming a victim of human trafficking. But really what I argue is that any young person can find themselves in a vulnerable place, and traffickers are very keen at identifying those who are suffering from any sort of vulnerability. My vulnerability was that I had just moved to San Francisco. So when I turned 18 and graduated from high school, I left my cozy little town of Boulder, Colorado, and I came to San Francisco. My plan was to do a year with AmeriCorps and the California Conservation Corps, which would enable me to set up residency in the state of California. And then I was planning on starting at San Francisco State the following fall. So I was in San Francisco. I was only 18, and I was really just out of sorts. I didn't have my support system. I didn't have a peer group yet. My friends and family were all 1,000 miles away back at home. And when I met my exploiter, he really could pick up on that. Looking back, I can see that he was looking for very specific things. And he pretended to be a romantic interest. He started flirting with me. And I remember being 19 and so young and naive and feeling like, wow, this person really is starting to care about me. He's asking so many questions about my past, my experiences, what my dreams are. And now looking back, I see that really he was just trying to collect as much information as he could about myself, my situation, my vulnerabilities, in order to then manipulate me and use those vulnerabilities against me. For 10 months, my exploiter pretended to be my boyfriend, which is an eternity when you're 18 years old. I thought I was in a long-distance relationship, and he took me shopping and on trips, and again, paying a lot of attention to me, always wanting to know what was going on in my mind, which felt really good as a young person. About 10 months in, he started saying that, you know, the lifestyle we had been living, it doesn't come for free, and money doesn't grow on trees, and if I want to continue to be with him and continue to live this lifestyle, I was going to need to start contributing. And in my young, naive mind, that made sense. I didn't want him to feel like I was taking advantage of him by just kind of taking from him. And so he then offered a way that he was going to teach me to help me support this lifestyle that we were living. So he exploited me throughout different brothels and strip clubs in San Francisco for over 7 years. And during that time, he worked very hard to make sure that our trauma bond was always reinforced. So anytime he would sense that I was starting to pull away or start to consider other options, he would make sure to reinforce that trauma bond, either through violence or through further isolation. He would put me in the car and take me on road trips for days on end, where I was oftentimes terrified that I was going to be killed and thrown out of the car. And sometimes he would reinforce the trauma bond by being really, really nice. And he would take me out for a day trip and spoil me and tell me how much he loved me, and he couldn't wait for us to get a certain amount of money so that I could retire and we could get married. And all of these things kind of helped me to just keep going. I didn't want to give up on this dream that he had created for me. Towards the 5th year, he started sleep depriving me. So he would pick me up from work at 2 o'clock in the morning, drive me around until I started to doze off and get sleepy. And then as soon as he saw me getting tired, he would just explode with anger, saying that, if I really loved him, I wouldn't be tired. And then he would have an excuse to drive around for another couple of hours, screaming at me and keeping me awake. And I was in a place where I just wanted to apologize and tell him I'm so sorry. And I was constantly in a place where I was trying to prove myself to him, which really created this situation of tunnel vision. I really couldn't see anything outside of making sure that I kept him happy so that the abuse would stop. At one point, I knew that if I didn't get some sleep, I was going to go crazy. Something was going to crack. And I started sleeping in the closet of the brothel where I was working, and I'm still to this day grateful for the manager who would unlock that closet for me. And I started sleeping there for 2 or 3 months, which helped me kind of get my thoughts back and my mind power back. And once I got some sleep under my belt, I was able to problem solve again. A lack of sleep inhibits people from being able to problem solve. And I just started seeing very clearly that I needed to figure out a way to escape. Luckily, I met a woman who was a complete stranger a few weeks after I started to problem solve, and she was in her 50s, and she said that she could tell that I was struggling and that something was wrong. And she said, I just have a feeling that whatever situation you're in, your pain is not going to go away. You're not going to be able to start healing until you leave that situation. And she gave me her phone number and went on her way. And 10 days later, I saw an opportunity. Something cracked. My exploiter came home. It was Saturday around noon, and I was sleeping, and he got very angry and started to yell and scream and fight with me for sleeping. And I knew that because it was Saturday, the neighbors were home, he probably would be less likely to get loud or super violent. And so I just saw an opportunity, and I grabbed a car key and ran. And I showed up on that woman's doorstep, hungry. I hadn't been able to eat because of the stress. And she took me in for over a year, and she really just focused on making sure that I had a safe place to rest, focused on making sure that I was feeling safe, and just kept telling me things like, you must be exhausted, you've been through so much, lay down, take a nap, take a breath. She made sure that I had healthy, clean food to eat, and she made sure that I was drinking enough water to stay hydrated. But for the first few months, our relationship was about her providing a safe place for me to rest. And that really did lay the foundation for me to then build from there and go and seek therapy and eventually my education. I first went to law enforcement a few months after leaving my exploiter, and their response basically was, how could you be so broken to let someone do that to you? It was more of the kind of victim blaming and shaming. And the thing about that question is that that's kind of a natural question in today's society, but it doesn't help us stop the criminals. So while law enforcement was busy asking me that question, my exploiter was able to continue exploiting young people. And I tried to go back to law enforcement 3 years later, and they opened a case and kind of investigated for a little while, and then called me and said that they thought the statute of limitations was 6 years, and it was actually 3 years, and that I had missed that cutoff by 32 days. So once again, here we have law enforcement really working as an agent to kind of empower my exploiter. So my exploiter is still, to this day, exploiting young women and girls. He was in Texas for a while, and now it looks like he's moved up to Oregon. But he is feeling very comfortable that he will never have to answer to law enforcement for his crimes. And so one of the things that we do here through the work I do with UC Davis is just making sure that we bring the exploiter back into the conversation. There are things that make people more vulnerable to being victims of exploitation, but exploitation is actually caused by the exploiter. Elle and Jessica, thank you so much for being here with me today. We are all three victims of human trafficking, sexual exploitation. And today we're going to talk a little bit about services, what worked and what didn't for us when we were making our transition from escaping from our exploiter and getting to the point where we are now, where we're all three functioning members of society that are, by all counts, healthy. So I just wanted to first talk a little bit about shame. I know, Jessica, you mentioned that you felt a lot of shame when you escaped from your first exploiter and went back home. I know for me, it took me a really long time to ask for help because I was so ashamed, and I felt like what happened to me was my fault, and that if I had chosen a different boyfriend or if I hadn't been so broken, that these things wouldn't have happened to me. And I just wanted to hear a little bit for you if shame played a role in your escape, or asking for help or not asking for help.
Yeah, absolutely. The reason I went back, that one time that I went back to my exploiter was because of the shame. Absolutely. Every day you walk down the street and you see people. The other day I saw a guy wearing a T-shirt that said hooker something. It was a business heading. There's all over the music. It's on all the television shows. There's a joke or a reference.
Yeah, I definitely think that exploiters are empowered by us feeling shame, and it's almost built in because once exploiters traffic us, then we have participated in some form of transactional sex work, and so we're automatically kind of shamed by society, which really helps exploiters because it keeps people like us from speaking out, either while we're being exploited or even after, because we feel so ashamed about what's happened. I want to talk a little bit to you, Jessica, about your story. You mentioned that your first time that you were being exploited, you were busted by law enforcement. And as a victim of commercial sexual exploitation, you were then taken to juvenile hall. And I think for some people that can be kind of tough to wrap their head around. Why, if you're a victim of a crime, are we taking you to the place where we bring criminals? So can you just talk a little bit about that experience?
Yeah, I feel the reason why they did it is because I was a flight risk. They didn't want me to run. And it was probably the best thing for them to do, honestly, or else I would have been out on the streets of LA running.
I mean, we can feel like maybe that's the best thing for them to do because maybe that's the best option.
Yeah.
But if you could kind of design a place for yourself to go besides juvenile hall where you could be kept from a flight risk, like what would that look like? Do you think that would have been possible? Do you think that would have been a better solution for you? If you could make your wildest dreams come true, where would they have taken you when they first found you that day?
Oh, a little bungalow by the ocean, No.
Talk about that, no.
Yeah, honestly, if they would have taken me and away from the scenery that I was in and put me in like a little, if they put me by the ocean air, I probably would have, that would have been helpful.
Yeah, sometimes I think service providers and adults, they don't necessarily see that third option where, maybe as a victim of a crime, we need to be wrapped in blankets and told that we're safe and brought somewhere beautiful so that we can start to rest.
And that would have been amazing to have if I would have been able to have like a utopia, I guess you would say, that a little getaway. That would have helped a lot. But at the time, the juvenile hall was what they had. There's not very many options out there.
I would say for me, definitely the number one service that I could not do without is therapy. And I had $12,000 of my therapy paid for through the victims' compensation program, which worked really well for me. And it sounds like it's been working well for you too. Can you tell me just a little bit about the program and how you've used it?
I had an advocate, so I didn't deal much with the inner workings of it.
And where did you get your advocate?
Through Rape Crisis.
Okay.
And my therapist had a direct line to victim witness, so everything kind of just came together. But yeah, that was definitely a big part of the healing. absolutely.
Was your therapy?
Was the therapy, of course, being able to speak. I wouldn't have been able to do the trial if I wouldn't have been able to verbalize previous to the trial. I hadn't dealt with what had happened to me still. I don't know if I ever will fully, but I had not said my full story until I was called to that trial.
Wow.
So yeah, luckily the trial went on for many months, so I had all those months to go through the therapy while the trial was going and going. So
I think that's really, really important. I think that no matter what, especially if we are dealing with law enforcement or trials, it needs to be concurrent with therapy. We need to make sure that we have the self-care and support while we're helping to fight crime.
Absolutely.
Can you talk a little bit about your advocate? Was that something that worked well for you? Now, I know that she wasn't a trafficking advocate, that this person was actually a sexual assault response team advocate, but can you talk about what worked there for you?
Yeah, they were just present. They were present, they acknowledged that they really didn't have an understanding of what was going on, and they respected what I had to say. They were there with me through the trial. They showed up at every court date. They had someone there. They would be the mediator between me and anyone that I needed to contact, including the district attorney's office. I also have to say that the district attorney's investigator was absolutely essential. I don't think that I would have been able to do what I did without her.
And what did she do that supported you?
She fought for this case. She was the one that was really fighting to get this seen. She was strong, and she answered every phone call. She answered every question. If she didn't have the answer, she went and she found the answer.
It's amazing. So
Yes.
you really felt like you were a human being that was being supported on this journey.
Yes.
And I just want to go back to the advocate one more time, because I think this is something that I hear a lot from the side of the victims. Is we come into contact with service providers and they basically say, this is what's going on with you, and this is what you have to do, and this is what you should do. But it sounds like this advocate kind of took a different role and just actually listened to what you needed. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, everyone did in this situation, which was the best thing that could have happened, is everyone acknowledged, okay, we don't quite understand, so we're just going to be there. What do you need? What do you need from us? What can I do for you? And although there were a lot of times that I didn't know how to answer that, I was able to exercise that in my head throughout the days. What do I need? Which is something I was never concerning myself with before. What do I need? But that at first it was uncomfortable, of course. It's a shift of perspective, but eventually I started thinking for myself. I started fighting for myself. What do I need? And that was a really big healing point too during the trial.
It sounds like you learned how to be your own advocate.
Yes.
By having a good advocate for yourself.
Yes. Yeah.
And I can definitely relate to that as well. Just watching how people advocated for me, I didn't have one specific advocate, but one of the things I'm most grateful for is that I know now how to advocate for myself and ask myself, what do I need and how can I get to that point? I want to talk a little bit about this idea of a survivor mentor. I know that you brought it up first. It's something that if you could have one thing be different about your journey, you said that you would like to have a survivor advocate. And I think I just want to go back actually to one quick point that you made earlier, is that the people who were helping you said that they didn't really understand. And I think just having even 3 people here with such different stories, we can see that there is no one size fits all, right? We always need to make sure that we're checking in with victims and survivors and making sure that we're understanding what their story is and what their needs are, because it really does change victim to victim.
Absolutely.
Elle, I know that you do community work currently. So can we talk about the lack of services? For instance, you had mentioned a victim recently, and when you went to go try to find services for this victim, tell me what you found.
Okay, so this victim was actually in San Francisco when she had been removed from Humboldt County and started being trafficked in San Francisco, and there's really no services that we can provide there. There's no shelters. We have a blackout for 5 hours north and east of shelters. So basically what would have had to happen, if we would have had a victim in Humboldt County, I would have had to contact Polaris, who would have had to send an advocate from San Francisco all the way to Humboldt County to pick them up or have them trucked out, because there's not even a shelter to put them in there.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely one of the biggest problems that I come across is when I'm training social workers. They want to know what services do we need to link these victims up with. I think social welfare oftentimes is kind of the liaison, the link to get a young person to services that they need. And right now it's just really tough because there really aren't any services.
Yeah.
I just want to end by just again kind of really honoring the journeys that we've been through, and by also making sure that when we're having these conversations, we need to also remember that we need to really start to look at who's at risk of becoming an exploiter, and maybe doing some intervention work along those lines, and at the same time educating young people to know that if you do find yourself in a situation where you're feeling shamed and afraid, there are people that can help, and we're 3 people that are working really hard to make the world a safer place. So do either of you have anything else you want to add?
I'm just thankful that I was given the opportunity to share my story in the hopes that this will help somebody one day. Maybe another girl won't be trafficked because of this video, or
It takes a lot of bravery to talk about being a victim of this crime, especially because we are talking about sex work and other things that are morally charged issues. So I just really appreciate you guys. A lot of people are out there and we're giving them voices as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for joining us today. I know that human trafficking can be a very complex issue and can be difficult to understand, and so I'm so happy that you were able to join us as we heard from myself and 2 other survivors about our experiences with exploitation and with service providers. I would also like to take a moment to thank the Northern California Training Academy and UC Davis. I do my trainings with them, and I also do other trainings as well for law enforcement, for youth groups, foster parents, as well as foster kids. But Northern California Training Academy, I just really am so appreciative of them for giving me this opportunity to help spread victims and survivors' voices and more information about traffickers and how they operate. I would also like to take a moment to reference Polaris. The Polaris Project is the National Anti-Trafficking Coalition. They're located in Washington, D.C., and there will be more information about them at the end of this video. But they do have a hotline, they have a text line for victims who are looking for help, and they also have a website with a lot of fantastic resources if folks are looking to get more involved in the anti-trafficking movement. Thank you so much for being here.